Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Luetkemeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Geithner, for being here today. Just to follow up on a couple of questions with regards to the economy of Europe. It seems to me that, we have in place a plan, and you say the pressures have been released or lessened anyway from what people thought was going to happen. But actually, has debt started to decrease at all?
Good question, because as many people pointed out, when growth weakens because of the shocks of the crisis, then that tends to increase the level of debt relative to GDP. But these countries have dramatically reduced the size of their actual deficits and their projected deficits.
Okay, so what they've done is actually get their budgets under control, but the amount of the debt has not started to go down because their economies have not got to the point yet where they can start paying down. Is that an accurate statement?
In some countries, it's starting to come down. In others, it's going to take a little while for the debt as a share of GDP to start to come down. But the deficits deficits coming down is a necessary path to that.
Right. Okay. So at least they have a path to get themselves out of this mess. Okay. What's the impact of gas prices going to be in Europe? Because the Iranians, if I'm not mistaken, have said they're going to not sell them any oil, and so where do you see that going?
Well, gas prices in Europe, when they go up, it's not good, but it has much less damaging effect even than it has in the United States for a lot of different reasons about how they tax gasoline in Europe in particular. So yes, it's not good, but Europe decided on its own to cut off their imports of oil from Iran because they're committed to, as we are, to trying to put as much pressure on that government.
Okay. With regards to the default credit swaps that are there, a lot of our banks here in this country have some of the default credit swaps insurance with regards to some of the European countries and specifically Greece. Greece basically is in default because creditors are being asked to take a haircut on at least 50 or 53% or something like that of their bond debt. What's the impact of that going to be to our banks, our financial institutions here in this country?
No material impact. U.S. financial institutions have dramatically reduced their exposure to the countries in crisis in Europe over the last 18 months or so, and they did buy protection against the remaining exposure they had, but that exposure is very, very small. But any investors around the world that had exposure to Greece going into this exchange will be able to, or at least almost all of them will be able to take advantage of the protection they purchased through CDS.
It's kind of interesting from the standpoint that this situation has been prevalent for at least a couple of years that I've been aware of, and it seems like we're just now allowing the American public to see what's going on here. Are they becoming more aware of it? And I'm kind of curious, why were we not being more out front, talking about this over the last couple of years, say 2 years ago? I'm sure your office knew about this and knew the concerns, especially after 2008, and knowing the intricacies of how complicated and how complex the financial world is and how tied together we as the United States and the European financial world is together, how we're being impacted here. Because to me it looks like, we just got done talking about the default credit swaps, we talked about the IMF funding, we talked about the swap lines, you talked about direct investment by the banks, we are direct trade partners. We're connected to those guys in about every way except being a state of the United States.
You're exactly right, and this started more than 2 years ago, and we have been intensively engaged with the Europeans, with the IMF, with the Fed, with the U.S. financial system, and with countries around the world over those more than 2 years, and encouraging them to move more aggressively. And they have moved slower than we would have liked, but we brought tremendous attention to it so that we were protecting the American financial system and try to encourage them in ways that didn't put the U.S. taxpayer at risk to try to move more aggressively. And I wish they've been able to move more quickly earlier, because it did do a lot of damage to us. If you look back to what happened to U.S. growth in 2010 and 2011, if you look at the moments where growth started to weaken in the United States, it's when Europe's was lighting itself on fire. So wish it had happened sooner, but we've been very actively engaged, and it feels better now, even though it's going to take a while.
Okay, very quickly, I know that one of the other members of the panel here this morning asked about FACTA. Just a quick question about that. Where do you think this is going? Because I've got 3 quotes here this morning from the Japanese Banking Association, European Banking Federation, Institute of International Finance. All are very concerned that we're going to be impacting international investment with the proposed rules? And I know we're not there yet, but can you just elaborate on just a little bit of where you think it's going to go?
Good
And
question.
Are you willing to consider a lot of these implications and minimize those?
Mr. Secretary, if you could elaborate quickly.
We've acted twice since the law was passed to give people more time to adjust and try to lessen the burden of compliance for the reasons that you stated. And we are going to continue to work very closely with financial institutions around the world and their governments to try to make sure we can meet the tests of the law without an undue burden that would damage other interests of the United States. And I don't think people are not confident we're fully there yet, but we're getting closer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair